All right, it looks like we've hit critical mass, people coming in. So let's go ahead and get started. And Marie, do you want to go ahead and
Yes,
start?
thanks, Brendan. Hello and welcome to today's first Advanced Clean Fleet Regulation Training webinar. I'm Anne-Marie Rogers, the Chief of Compliance Assistance and Outreach at CARB. Today's training represents a lot of hard work by staff and the first training, and we expect this is the first of several. The ACF rule is the latest development in CARB's long history of setting increasingly stringent emission standards for mobile sources that are needed to protect public health and the welfare of all Californians. By 2035, CARB's heavy-duty vehicle regulations are expected to introduce about 1.7 million commercial zero-emission vehicles into the state and result in over $26 billion of statewide health benefits. Wanted to give you a quick status update on the ACF regulation. As many of you know, the regulation was approved by our board in April, and the Office of Administrative Law gave final approval at the end of September, making this regulation effective on October 1st, 2023. Today's webinar is designed to provide information on what is required to comply with the ACF regulation. We've had enormous interest in today's event and have made some modifications to streamline the training to be efficient and effective. Because of the overwhelming interest, we unfortunately won't be able to take any live questions today. We have reviewed and sorted through the hundreds of questions submitted during registration, and will provide answers to as many of those that are relevant to today's training. If you don't hear the answer to your specific question, please feel free to email us. We've been adding new tools and resources also to our website that answer many of the common questions, and the presentation today will show you where to access them. We have allocated 3 hours, but may or may not take the entire time. As I mentioned, this is our first training webinar, and we expect to have future events. Those future events will likely be more targeted and segmented, and we will ask for feedback at a later date on what we should focus on. So with that, I hope you enjoy this training, and I'm going to turn it over to Brandon Rose.
All right, thank you, Anne-Marie. So everybody, I am Brandon Rose, air pollution specialist here in the Compliance Assistance and Outreach section at CARB, and I'm going to help guide today's training. Longtime CARB staff is actually part of the team that wrote the truck and bus regulation way back, and I've been helping with the ACF rule development since the start. Some of you may remember it was actually the month before COVID started. It was the first workshop. It's been going on for a long time, although I'm not the core ACF rule staff. We'll meet them a little bit later. They're here today. I actually got my start at the California Energy Commission, so I have a background in energy as well. And that's proving useful as we really get into transportation electrification. So just a few notes about today and the format. We're going to run through the presentation, and we're going to stop frequently to go through the submitted questions on each topic. I've reviewed and sorted all of the questions that were submitted by the deadline, and so said there's just too many to ask every single one. We had hundreds, but I think we've cut out a really good variety, and it will help clarify the requirements as we go along today. Anne-Marie mentioned, due to the size of today's audience and just the volume of material, we're not going to take direct questions, and I apologize for that up front. We always prefer to be more interactive, especially when we're doing a training versus like regulatory development. So we'll try to reintegrate that back into the future. There's just been a huge demand, and I apologize. We had to switch links midway through registration when we realized how much interest there was. What else? So today we're really staying focused on the ACF rule and its requirements only. There were a number of questions on like the Advanced Clean Trucks rule, the Clean Truck rule, or the Omnibus regulation, but we're only going to address those briefly and only in the way that they interact with the ACF rule. We have a bunch of other trainings and resources on our website to help you with those rules. If you're looking for information on how to select and operate zero-emission vehicles, we have resources on the ZEV Truck Stop page. We have Next Stop to Zero events, and we have our CalFleet Advisor tool that's there to assist you. We'll touch briefly on the vehicles at the beginning of the presentation, but we're really like what's available, but we're really focused on the core requirements. I don't think there's any Zoom instructions needed today, so let me jump a slide forward. So we will post these things in the chat. There it goes. Olivia's going to help post some links in the chat as well. So we'll do just a quick round of those who are going to be helping out today. So you have me. Let's go ahead. Yusuf, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yusuf Zardo. I'm an air pollution specialist here at CARB, and I work in the compliance assistance and outreach section.
Molly?
Everyone, my name is Olivia Lane. I'm an air pollution specialist in the compliance assistance and outreach section as well. I'll be dropping some helpful links in the chat. So make sure to click on those links during the webinar today and save them in your browser. I'll hand it to Molly next.
Thanks, Olivia. Hi, my name is Molly Munns. I've been working for CARB for over 10 years now. I transferred over to work on the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation about 1.5 years ago, and it's been a lot of work, and I'm excited to finally get to this stage in development. So nice to meet everyone.
Perfect. Do we have Chris still? Saw his head, but it disappeared. There you are. Sorry.
Yeah, this is Chris Franceschi, air pollution specialist. I've been working on CARB regs for a number of years now and helped with the Advanced Clean Trucks and Advanced Clean Fleets regulation.
Perfect. So that's everybody that's sort of the core team today. We have Craig During on and several other managers who's manager of that ACF section. He might jump on here and there, help clarify things. Or if we say something we misspeak, he'll jump on and make sure we're on the right track as well. So you might see him. Okay, let me go ahead and jump to the next slide. Thanks, everybody. So let me just run through. This is the outline for today. We have a lot we want to try to get through in 3 hours. I have a detailed sort of agenda, so if I might cut us off at times and move us into the next section just so we get through everything. But we're going to run through air quality. We'll do a little background. We'll talk about the drayage vehicles, high priority fleets, state and local government. We'll talk about the model year and milestone schedules. We'll spend quite a lot of time on extensions, and then talk about reporting requirements, and then have some resources and links and a wrap up. Yusuf is going to be giving a big chunk of the presentation today, and we'll be alternating back and forth as we go through. We'll be stopping frequently. We're going to take a lot of questions as we make our way through it as well. I do have a brief break scheduled about halfway through, probably about 10:30, 10:40 is what we're thinking for 5 to 10 minutes as well. Just a sort of brief disclaimer for the day. The presentation, the answers, we've created them to assist you with compliance efforts. It does contain rule summaries, and they're pertinent to most of the common situations. However, it may not detail every possible nuance or scenario under the ACF rule or what's in the language. So ultimately, it is the responsibility of each individual fleet to ensure they're in compliance with all the applicable requirements for them and what's in the regulatory language. So at times in today's presentation, we'll say, yeah, you just need to go look at the regulatory language for some of the extreme details. Okay. Couple notes with the Zoom. I think you can put your hand up, but we're not taking any live questions, either written or verbal today. So we don't need to do that. Again, Olivia will be putting the links into the chat. The presentation is posted on the ACF page under the meeting and events, little link on the side, and we'll put that into the chat multiple times so you can follow along with us as well on that. Okay, I wanted to start it off. I have a poll question. Let me go ahead and see if I can get that launched for you.
Can we introduce Jessica real quick, Brandon?
Oh, did we miss Jessica? Yeah, come on.
Good morning, I'm Jessica Johnston, work on the Advanced Clean Fleets drayage portion of the rule. Also worked on the previous drayage rule that was passed in 2007. So thanks for joining us today. We'll try to answer most of the questions related to drayage as well. Thanks.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Okay, I think I have gone ahead and Let me go ahead. Let's try to relaunch the poll. There we go. Okay, so I have just a few questions just to give us a better idea of like who's with us today. We have over 1,000 people. So let me just read through these lists of people are answering. What role in the trucking industry best describes you? You're environmental consultant, government affairs, owner, but not usually driver or operator, fleet manager, owner operator, administrative / clerical, sales of dealership, a manufacturer or another. And then you'll need to scroll down to get the other two questions. So question 2 is, what information is most important for you to hear about today? So we have the state and local government, drayage trucks, high priority fleets, extensions / exemptions, and then reporting and record keeping, and then others. And then the third question on there, what type of operation do you do or do you oversee? So we have here local delivery / last mile. You put your package deliveries in there. Regional haul, regional delivery. Have long haul over the road. And then I put in the category here of vocational. So I was really thinking like a mechanic's truck or a work truck, or maybe like a van sort of running around for doing just sort of vocational operations, like a plumbing service or something like that. And then the last one would be a specialty, which is, I would just say, put it in there if you don't clearly fall into the other ones. Okay. So we're still getting responses. I'll give that just another minute and we'll keep moving. Right, it looks like it is slowing down. Okay, let me go ahead and end poll. We'll do a quick share. So it looks like about 20% consulting, couple of owners, but not usually drivers, have about 30% fleet managers, and then 10% administrative, 8% dealers / sales, and then 7% manufacturer. That's a good mix. For 2, what do you want to hear about today? So 45% state and local government, about 25% drayage, high priority fleets about 45%, extensions about 28%, record keeping is 44%, and they don't have to 100 because you can select more than one. Okay. And then the last one, local delivery, last mile, 25%, regional haul, 28%, long haul, a little lower at 16%, vocational mechanics / work trucks, 31%, and then we have 27% specialty, and then 40% in other as well. So, okay, gives us just an idea of what's going on. Let me close that. All right, let me go ahead. I'm going to turn it over to Yusuf Zardo, who's going to run through the presentation for a bit.
Thank you, Brandon. Good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. First slide, measures to clean up heavy-duty vehicles. The board has taken many key steps to reduce medium and heavy-duty vehicle emissions. This slide reviews some of the newer measures to clean up heavy-duty vehicles. The zero-emission transition began with regulations on transit buses in 2018 and airport shuttles in 2019. In 2020 and 2021, the board adopted 3 major truck regulations. The Advanced Clean Trucks regulation will ensure a supply of new zero-emission trucks from major manufacturers. The heavy-duty omnibus regulation will reduce criteria pollutant emissions from internal combustion engines sold in California. And the heavy-duty Inspection and Maintenance Program, or Clean Truck Check, will ensure that combustion engines and their emission control systems are maintained and repaired timely. The Advanced Clean Fleets regulation, highlighted in the red box, is the next step to drive commercialization of zero-emission vehicles in fleets that are best suited to lead the way. Finally, Last September, the board adopted the state implementation plan that includes the regulation and a new zero-emission truck measure, which emphasizes that more is still needed to achieve federal attainment standards. For the sake of time, we're not going to go into the requirements of the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation, the heavy-duty omnibus regulation, or the Clean Truck Check regulation, but we have many resources on our website for them. Next slide, please. Biggest trucks have highest emissions. Reducing air pollution is critical to protecting the health of Californians. Here is some inventory information. Much of the air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions in California come from the transportation sector, with medium and heavy-duty trucks being among the highest emitters. Trucks can come in many different configurations and sizes, and there are nearly 2 million trucks operating in California. However, Class 7 and Class 8 tractors have a disproportionate share of the emissions burdening communities living near freight hubs. They account for about 12% of the total truck population, but they represent about 48% of the daily NOx emissions. We had several questions submitted asking about the rule benefits and how much of a difference it will make when it comes to air quality and climate change. So here are a few statistics. The Advanced Clean Fleet regulation is projected to reduce statewide emissions by 29.3 tons per day of NOx and 1.8 tons per day of PM 2.5, which are estimated to lead to 2,526 fewer cardiopulmonary deaths and 1,177 fewer emergency room visits for asthma. The total estimated statewide health benefit is $26.5 billion. The regulation is also critical to achieving carbon neutrality by 2045, and the cumulative greenhouse gas emission reductions from 2024 to 2050 is 327 million metric tons. These projections do not account for upstream emissions and represent a conservative estimate of the expected reductions. Next slide, please. Zero-emission vehicle models in the United States. We are often asked if there are any zero-emission vehicles available today. And yes, there are about 150 truck models available for order in all weight classes. The market is growing rapidly, partly due to the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation. In situations where a certain zero-emission vehicle may not be available, the Advanced Clean Fleet regulation does have a delay provision built in. We will discuss this extension in detail later today. Vehicle resources. Here are two good websites to help find vehicle information. The Hybrid and Zero Emission Truck and Bus Voucher Incentive Project, or HVIP, vehicle catalog is here on the left, and the Zero Emission Technology Inventory, or ZETI, on the right. You can explore different vehicle classes, body types, and manufacturer, as well as key information about capabilities like range. More information on the zero-emission vehicle models can be found by visiting CARB's ZEV Truck Stop webpage. Advanced Clean Trucks Regulation. The Advanced Clean Trucks Regulation ensures the supply of available zero-emission vehicles will continue to grow in upcoming years. It requires manufacturers to sell zero-emission vehicles as a growing percentage of sales in all vehicle classes starting in 2024. 8 other states have joined California on advanced clean trucks regulation, with the most recent partners being Colorado and Maryland. Other states are actively considering the regulation. The board's resolution set zero-emission targets for future fleet requirements. 100% zero-emission drayage, last mile delivery, and public fleets by 2035. 100% zero-emission buses, utility fleets, and refuse trucks by 2040. And 100% emission everywhere feasible by 2045. We'll go ahead and stop and review some of the questions. And for that, we'll go to Molly. Let's see, let me go ahead and ask some of those questions regarding these topics that we just covered. So for Molly, for vehicles, the first question is a two-part question. Can you clarify a zero-emission vehicle and ZEV, and what is not considered a ZEV?
Thanks, Yusuf. A zero-emission vehicle is a vehicle that produces no tailpipe emissions whatsoever. Examples of ZEVs and to comply with this regulation are battery electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles. And a near zero emission vehicle, or NZEV, means a vehicle capable of operating like a ZEV using electricity stored on board the vehicle for a minimum number of miles, or has a minimum all-electric range as specified and tested in accordance with California greenhouse gas emission exhaust standards and test procedures. Those are in the regulation if you want to look them up. NZEVs manufactured before 2035 can be used to comply with the state and local government or high priority fleets requirements, but not the drayage requirements. Vehicles combusting natural gas, biofuels, or hydrogen are not considered ZEVs, and since they still produce tailpipe emissions.
Thank you, Molly. The next question: are law enforcement emergency vehicles greater than 8,500 pound gross vehicle covered under this rule?
I'm just getting an earthquake alert on my phone. I don't know if anyone else got one. Maybe. Okay, so I didn't feel anything. So I'm sorry, Yusuf. The law enforcement emergency vehicles, are they covered under this rule? Well, first of all, this rule covers vehicles greater than 8,500 gross vehicle weight rating. So if there is an emergency vehicle that's greater than that, it still is not covered if it falls under California Vehicle Code Section 165.
Thank you. So the next question is, what other vehicles are exempt from all parts of this rule besides emergency vehicles as defined in California Vehicle Code Section 165?
Okay, there's a few. Military tactical vehicles are not included. There's also limited term exemptions that apply to vehicles involved in declared emergency events, but there is some reporting and record keeping for those vehicles. Oh, also, there's a few exemptions that apply to high priority and federal fleets and state and local government agency fleets, and those include school buses, vehicles awaiting sale, historical vehicles, dedicated snow removal vehicles, 2-engine vehicles, and heavy cranes. And there's also an exemption for high priority and federal fleets, so they can exempt their test vehicles if they have them in their fleets.
Thank you, Molly. The next question is, what exemptions are available for just drayage truck portion of the Advanced Clean Fleet regulation? For that, we'll go to Jessica.
Yeah, thank you. So for the drayage portion of the rule, there are several vehicle type exemptions that we have for dedicated use vehicles as we define them. Some examples of that are the auto transport vehicles, fuel delivery vehicles, concrete mixers, on-road mobile cranes, and vehicles that use a power takeoff unit to operate. In addition to that, we also have other vehicles that are subject to the that are not subject to the regulation are under the mobile cargo handling equipment. So those that are under that regulation are also exempt from drayage.
Thank you, Jessica. Next question is a 3/4 ton pickup truck included in the advanced clean fleet regulation? For that, we'll go to Molly.
Yeah, it is within the scope of this regulation. A 3/4 ton pickup will have a gross vehicle weight rating of over 8,500 pounds. So yes.
Thank you, Molly. Next question, will CARB provide exemptions for ADA compliant fleet vehicles that have a gross vehicle weight rating of just over 8,500 pounds?
Light duty package delivery vehicles under 8,501 pounds gross vehicle weight rating are subject to the high priority and federal fleet requirements. These are light duty package delivery vehicles, and that's only under the high priority and federal fleet requirements. Other than those vehicles, this rule covers the medium and heavy duty vehicles with a gross vehicle weight rating over 8,500 pounds. For vehicles under the 8,500 pounds, CARB has developed a separate set of regulations. They're for light duty vehicles, and it's called the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulation. And if you're not familiar with that, these rules are driving the ZEV supply in the light duty market and establish 100% zero emission vehicle sales requirement in 2035. Also, just to get directly to answer this question, steel lift or other ADA accessories that are added on after the vehicle is manufactured does not increase the gross vehicle weight rating that the manufacturer supplies to the vehicle.
Okay, thank you. The next question, does the rule apply to trucks with power takeoff unit, PTO?
Yes, it does. For the high priority and federal fleets and the state and local government fleets requirements, yes, PTO is required. However, they are exempted from the drayage truck requirements, as Jessica mentioned earlier.
Okay, thank you. The next question, what is the overlap of ACF, Advanced Clean Fleets, with CARB's other zero emission fleet rules?
I think Yusuf mentioned a few of these in his introduction slides. So I'll just briefly mention them here and how they interact with the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. So trucks that are owned by transit agencies are exempt until 2030. And any transit vehicles in those fleets, they're subject to the Innovative Clean Transit regulation. Regulated airport shuttle buses that are owned by state and local governments and who are following the ZEV purchase schedule are also fully exempt from this rule, and instead they would follow the zero emission airport shuttle regulation. And finally, regulated airport shuttle buses that are subject to that rule, zero emission airport shuttle regulation, that are owned by high priority or federal fleets may elect to exempt those vehicles from their California fleet until January 1st, 2027.
And
Thank you, Molly.
Yusuf, real fast, I just wanted to jump in just to correct something that was said earlier. So for the near zero emission vehicles, those with the 2035 and older model year would count as a ZEV, not just those manufactured before 2035.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, well, let's jump back on the presentation and keep going. Next, I'll provide a summary of the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. Next slide, please. Advanced Clean Fleet has 4 main components that complement each other. On manufacturers, a 100% zero emission vehicle sales requirement, and 3 fleet requirement categories on drayage trucks, state and local government fleets, and high priority fleets. The regulation is phased in over the course of the next 2 decades, and all combustion powered vehicles are guaranteed their full useful life. this transition will not happen overnight. Next slide, please. 100% zero emission vehicle sales requirement. First, on the manufacturer side, Advanced Clean Fleet Regulation presents a first of its kind requirement for medium and heavy duty trucks, establishing an end to internal combustion engine sales. Per board direction, beginning 2036, all medium and heavy duty vehicles sold into California need to be zero emissions. This piece of the rule is a key element for meeting the state's carbon neutrality target and the goals laid out in the governor's executive order. The 100% requirement is also sends a clear regulatory signal to the trucking market, including manufacturers, fleets, infrastructure providers, service technicians, and local governments. Drayage truck requirements. Next is the drayage truck requirement, which apply to tractors operating in drayage service. The goal of this requirement is to create a fully zero-emission drayage fleet by 2035. Here are the basic requirements. To conduct drayage operations in California, the trucks need to be registered in the CARB's online reporting system. Legacy combustion-powered drayage trucks will be allowed to register through December 31st, 2023. Then, beginning January 1st, 2024, only zero-emission trucks can be added to the registration system. Existing legacy drayage trucks will be able to remain in drayage service until the end of their minimal useful life, as long as they visit a California seaport or intermodal rail yard annually. Then, starting in 2025, legacy trucks that exceed their useful life need to be removed from drayage service. What is the useful life? The useful life for a tractor is defined as a minimum of 13 years of operation, but no more than 800,000 miles or 18 years. Vehicles would need to be removed from the fleet once they reach these thresholds. And in 2035, all trucks will be zero emissions. So we've received some drayage questions. Let's run through some of those. And let me go back to the questions. So for the drayage questions, we'll go to Jessica. What happens to the port trucks that don't meet the deadline to register? Can they still fix the issue after January 1st, 2024?
All right, thanks, Yusuf. So the answer is no. All of the legacy drayage trucks must be registered by December 31st of this year to continue to operate in the seaports and intermodal rail yards.
Okay, thank you. The next drayage question is, are leased drayage trucks required to be registered by December 31st, 2023 if they are not zero emission?
Yeah, so all of the leased drayage trucks would also need to be registered by December 31st of this year to continue to operate.
Thank you. Okay, the next question, do I have to report my drayage trucks annually?
So no, you don't have to report them annually. However, there is a reporting requirement for mileage for trucks 12 years and older that begins in 2025. And those trucks will have to start reporting their mileage annually so we can see if they've exceeded the useful life of 800,000 miles.
Thank you. Next question is, can I register my drayage trucks now?
Yes. There is a registration and reporting link on the ACF webpage that provides information about where to register and helps to answer any of those questions about registration.
Okay, thank you. Next question is my drayage truck information already entered?
So drayage trucks that were previously reported in the Arbor system were transferred to the trucker system. Fleets would need to verify all the information in the new account is accurate. If you have questions, please email the zevfleet@arb.ca.gov. I think we can put that in the chat. If you have any trouble accessing your account or did not receive the notification for your fleet that your vehicles were transferred.
Thank you. Next question is, if I have repowered my engine, does that restart the useful life?
No, legacy drayage trucks cannot be repowered with an internal combustion engine to extend the minimum useful life of a vehicle.
Okay, thank you. And the last drayage question, what are some examples of situations that qualify for the drayage truck zero-emission vehicles that do not meet the daily operational needs exemption?
Okay, so there is no daily use exemption that's applicable for the drayage portion of the Advanced Clean Fleets rule.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yusuf, can I jump in? Jessica, can I ask you to clarify when we say basically no repowers, ICE repowers will extend the minimum useful life. So if I have a drayage truck, let's say it's like a 2015, and I've had to repower it maybe 5 years ago, that doesn't restart. Right, if I put in, let's say I repowered in 2020, that doesn't restart the clock at 2020. It still remains a 2015 truck from the useful life provision perspective, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. So for the next portion of the presentation, I'll turn it over to Brandon and he'll go over the next few slides. Brandon, back to you.
Oh, I'm back. Okay, sorry. Okay. So thanks, Yusuf. You can see what we have coming up. We're going to talk about high priority fleets in the state and local government in the model year and milestone schedules, and we'll have a break after that. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the high priority fleets and the federal fleet requirements. This really portion of the regulation, it applies to well-capitalized businesses that are well suited for electrification. These requirements apply to any fleet with 50 or more vehicles under common ownership and control, or any fleet with greater than $50 million in revenue. And that's generally from your tax filings from the previous year, as well as federal government agencies. Okay. There are additional requirements on brokers and motor carriers to ensure that they're hiring compliant fleets. So in addition to the class 2B through 8 vehicles, this rule also applies to the off-road yard tractors, light duty delivery vehicles, such as those operated by the Postal Service. Okay, so that's just sort of the basic overview. Let me run through some of the questions we received, just talking a little bit about what do those numbers really mean. So I have a couple. First one is, as a company that is over $50 million per year in revenue, but has a small fleet of 7 transit vans, am I in high priority fleets? So basically this is saying, hey, I'm over the $50 million revenue threshold, but under 50 trucks. That's the question. So the answer is yes, that you're still part of the high priority fleets in that situation. Okay. Second question was, what about a nonprofit organization like a healthcare company that has trucks, right? So our nonprofits, do we have any delineation for a nonprofit? And the answer is, if you have the more than $50 million or the 50 trucks or more, the rule doesn't matter if you're a nonprofit or not. So the applicability criteria and subject to the regulation stays the same, right? So nonprofit status doesn't matter. Okay. I have a couple more questions just to clarify this part. I'm gonna bring Chris on and have him help us out with those. All right. So the first question I have is, how is this small fleet related? How are small fleets under $50 million in revenue and under 50 vehicles impacted by the regulation and reporting?
Yeah, sure. So for small fleets, and this answer applies to high priority fleets only, because small fleets could be subject to the drayage portion of the regulation or the state and local government fleets portion. So as it applies to high priority and federal fleets, fleets with at least one vehicle and over $50 million in annual revenue are affected by advanced clean fleets. If the fleet has less than $50 million in annual revenue and less than 50 affected vehicles, they are not likely affected by high priority fleets portion of ACF. However, if the fleet is under common ownership or control of a controlling party, that small fleet may be required by that controlling party to coordinate with the controlling party to upgrade their vehicle to a ZEV.
The next question is, do fleets that are excluded from the high priority fleet requirement need to report?
No, but if they are under the control of a controlling party, they may need to provide their truck information to that controlling party because the controlling party has to report it. However, all drayage trucks are affected and need to be reported to remain in drayage service.
Just a couple more. Next question we had was, how would the regulation affect companies who hire different small companies or owner-operators?
So controlling parties must include those fleets that are under their common ownership or control when reporting and complying as a whole.
Okay. And the last one, just in this section, will there be another rule for fleets that are not included in the Advanced Clean Fleet regulation?
Yeah, so the 2022 state implementation plan does identify a future zero-emission trucks measure, which with the goal of transitioning the rest of California's trucking fleet to zero-emission vehicles. I believe that's got a 2028 anticipated board date and a 2030 plus implementation timeframe.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about compliance options. And so the model year schedule, you can see here, just a quick summary of it. This is the default option for high priority fleets to follow the model year schedule. Then we'll talk about milestones next. Starting January 2024, fleet owners need to report which trucks will be part of the California fleet. From that point forward, all new additions to the fleet need to be zero emissions or near zero emission vehicles. And as mentioned earlier, a near zero emission vehicle is a plug-in hybrid which can achieve a minimum all-electric range. Trucks that reach the end of their minimum useful life will be removed from the California fleet. And the next slide gets into a little bit more details. So here is sort of an example to just illustrate how this will work in practice. This slide shows the schedule to remove the legacy trucks based on the age of the engine. Okay, so it's on here. So high mileage vehicles like tractors, they're guaranteed a minimum useful life of 13 years of operations, but we need to be removed from the fleet once they reach 800,000 miles or 18 years old. So you can see on the schedule, right, a 2010 model year engine can operate until 28 on the top line there. Then as you go down, newer engines have additional time. So you can see at the bottom, a new truck would potentially be able to operate into the 2040s. So broadly, this structure ensures a phase-in over time to the zero emissions, of course, based on the age of the vehicles and the company's fleet makeup today. We were asked a question to go over the useful life for all three rule categories. So I'll give just a really brief review. For the model year schedule, under drayage and high priority and federal fleets, you can follow the useful life definition here. But for the state and local governments, they use the ZEV milestone option that we will see in just a moment. All right. There may be a new law. I think that may be changing, but the governor may have just signed that. So up in the air. We'll let you know if there's a change. And then that's this slide. I'm going to let Yusuf go ahead and take the next slide, and then I'll be back for the other ones.
Thank you, Brandon. So the next slide is state and local government requirements. For state and local government fleets, the default option is a zero-emission purchase requirement that aligns with public fleet purchasing cycles. Starting in 2024, the state and local government requirements state 50% of purchases are to be zero emissions. That means the other half can be combustion powered until 2027. Note that zero emission vehicles can be purchased equally to full zero emission vehicles to provide more flexibility. Next, we have an extension for agencies that are in designated counties. As you can see from the map there, these agencies will remain exempt from zero emission purchase requirement until 2027. This exemption also has been granted to divisions that have 10 or fewer vehicles. In this situation, all purchases made would need to be zero emissions or near zero emissions starting in 2027. In this compliance structure, if no vehicles are being purchased, then no action is required. This means that fleets can continue to operate their vehicles as long as they wish. One common question we received was whether advanced clean fleet regulations affect municipal fleets. And the answer is yes, all public fleets are affected. We have a few submitted questions. So for that, let's go over those. Switch back to that.
Just quickly, just to clarify what Brandon had mentioned briefly earlier, he was talking about Assembly Bill 1594 that was filed by Garcia and filed by the Secretary of State on October 8th. So that was only 10 days ago. We don't really have any updates on that.
Thank you, Molly, for the clarification. The next questions that we'll go over are pertaining to state and local government requirements. So for that, we'll go to Molly for this next question. How do we know if our local agency has a 2024 or 2027 deadline?
Well, reporting is mandatory starting in 2024, so next year. And all state and local government agencies start with 50% NZEV or ZEV purchases in 2024, except those that are shown in the red in the map on your screen, and those are called designated counties. They're listed in the regulation. I can mention them now: Alpine, Amador, Butte, Calaveras, Colusa, Del Norte, Glen, Humboldt, Inyo, Lake, Lassen, Mariposa, Mendocino, Modoc, Mono, Nevada, Plumas, Shasta, Sierra, Siskiyou, Sutter, Tehama, Trinity, Ptolemy, and Yuba. As well as state and local government agencies that are not shown in red, but are instead shown in white. Those are more populated counties right now. And though if you are a state or local government agency and you have 10 vehicles or less in your fleet, you can wait until 2027 to start your phase in for ZEV and ZEV purchase.
Thank you, Molly. So the next question regarding state and local government requirements, how does it apply to a school district and when does it apply?
It applies the same to all government agency fleets, including special districts like school districts. School buses, however, are exempt, and those are the ones that are defined in the California Vehicle Code.
Thank you. Next question. Are there special requirements for extensions for public water or wastewater fleets?
There is a waste and wastewater provision for existing compressed natural gas vehicles that are implementing California's organic diversion regulation. They do need to be engaged in activities that divert organic waste and produce biomethane. These vehicles have to be exclusively fueled with biomethane to qualify for this provision. what the provision would do is it delays group one and, well, first of all, a fleet must report their intention to utilize this compliance option in the annual reporting, and they must permanently opt in to the high priority and federal fleet requirements, the ZEV milestone schedule. So once they do that, they're able to move qualified vehicles, the compressed natural gas vehicles, from group 1 and 2 in that schedule into group 3. So that gives them anywhere between 3 and 5 additional years to transition to ZEV for those vehicles.
Okay. Thank you, Molly. Let's go back to the presentation. The next slide that we'll be going over is the optional ZEV milestone phase-in, and for that, I'll turn it back to Brandon.
Perfect. Thanks, Yusuf. Let me just jump a slide here. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the milestone option phase-in. Okay, so this option, it provides a more flexible compliance approach than just the model year schedule with the useful life provision. It's available to both high priority fleets and the state and local government fleets. And then note that the ZEV milestone schedule, it's an optional phase-in for these categories. It requires a fleet to waive their SB1 useful life rights. So under this option, a certain portion of a fleet needs to be composed of zero or near zero emission vehicles. The requirements are more aggressive for well-suited vehicles and then delayed for more specialized or longer distance vehicles. You can see the phase-in happens gradually over the next 2 decades. So it's not overnight. Basically, as long as the ZEV milestones are met, fleet owners have considerable flexibility with the rest of the vehicles, right? You can prioritize which vehicles to electrify and can continue to purchase combustion-powered engines as long as they meet the overall phase-in requirement. When purchasing a new internal combustion engine, it does need to be certified to the California Omnibus standard. These are the cleanest engines available in the nation. We do have a question or two about that a little bit later. So let me just run through this table that we're looking at and give a little more detail and an example. So you see you have the 3 groups of vehicles with different dates there. For group 1, you can see it's box trucks, vans, 2-axle buses, yard trucks, and then essentially postage delivery trucks, light duty parcel delivery. For the group 2 trucks, it's the work trucks. We'll have a question about that. Day cab tractors, 3-axle buses and pickups. Looks like I have a meeting that wants to pop up. 3-axle buses and pickups are in the last category, group 3. And we have some, we'll talk about that. Through sleeper count tractors. So you can see the requirements, they phase in over time. So starting in 2025, the group 1 vehicles, they have a 10% requirement. So if you don't own any of these group 1 vehicles, then there's no replacement requirement, right? Then the group 2 and 3 vehicles, they come in at 10% for 2027 and 2030. So if you have a sleeper cab, like over the road tractor, the requirements don't affect you until January 1st, 2030 is when they would start phasing in. And then you can see this goes all the way out to 2042. And so the next slide, we have a little bit more specific example. Okay, so this slide is really illustrating how the ZEV milestone schedule is applied to a mixed fleet of 100 vehicles. So here we have 60 vehicles. They're in group 1. We have 20 group 2 vehicles, and we have 20 group 3 vehicles. And then on the bottom row, you can see the total number of ZEVs that are required in each year. So for 2025, this fleet will need 10% of the vehicles to be ZEVs. So that's 60 vehicles times 10% is equal to the 6 vehicle requirement. If you skip forward into 2029, there would be 15 group 1 vehicles and 2 group 2 vehicles, right? and for a total of 17 vehicles in that year. It doesn't matter which type of vehicles they're in. So in other words, that means any 6 ZEVs for 2025 would meet the first milestone requirement for this example, right? Whether it's group 1 or group 3. And we're going to clarify that with a few questions later, right? So any of the vehicles will count. I want to note this particular example, it doesn't show every single compliance year. So like on here, we're missing the 2027 for group 2 vehicles, which have requirements. So it's really just illustrative. And then just a quick note about calculations. We use the standard 0.5 rounding rules. So half a truck rounds up to 1. So just to give an example of that, so let's say you have 10 vehicles and you have a 25% requirement. So 10 times 25% is 2.5 trucks. So you round the 2.5 trucks up to 3. That's how we do rounding here. And then we do have the fleet calculator posted to the ACF website to help you with these calculations. You can put your vehicles in, and we'll give you that information. If we have time at the end of the day, we'll show you where that is located. Okay, so that's a review of the milestone schedule. Let's go ahead. We have a fair number of questions on these last couple of sections to run through. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to start with the milestone questions is what we're going to start with. And then I believe, let me just take a quick look. Chris is going to help us with those. So here's a common one. Hey, Chris, says, are the percent metrics required to be met on January 1st or December 31st of a given year? So we've given these numbers as January 1st or December 31st is the deadline.
It's January 1st.
Okay, good. Some of these questions are quick. Let's see, what else do we have? We had a number of questions asking about pickup trucks. So this one is, can a pickup with a GVWR, gross vehicle weight rating, over 8,500 pounds be included in the fleet calculation percent?
Yes, pickups with a GVWR over 8,500 pounds must be included.
Okay. And so conversely, if you're under 8,500 on a pickup truck, you're not included.
Not unless
Correct.
the pickup meets the definition of a light-duty package delivery vehicle.
Perfect. Okay, here's a question talking about group 1 and group 2 vehicles. How is a box truck different from a work truck?
So box trucks are defined in the regulation, and it means a single unit vehicle with a fully or partially enclosed space with a roof and at least 3 sides, designed for transporting cargo or payload, excluding the driver and passengers. Examples include vehicles commonly referred to as step vans, refrigerated vans, dry vans, chipper trucks, and box reefer trucks. Work trucks, on the other hand, are defined in the regulation as any vehicle that does not meet the other defined terms. So if we're looking at that milestone schedule, you can see that there's different vehicle types laid out under the different milestone groups. All of those terms are defined in the regulation, and if any of the vehicles do not meet those defined terms, then work truck is the catch-all category, which they would fall into.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for that. Okay, and the next question is, can the ZEV milestones option minimum percents each year be combined for groups of 1, 2, 3? So basically, what counts towards the totals required?
So the total milestone is calculated based on the calculation provided in the regulation. It's based on the total number of vehicles in each group and the percentage required for that year within each group. All 3 numbers are then added together per the calculation in the fact sheet and regulation, and that would give you the total number of ZEVs that you would need to have by January 1st of any given year. Any ZEV, again, within the scope of the regulation can be counted towards this total number of ZEVs needed.
Okay, and then we have another question. What if we own zero-emission vehicles that do not travel to California? Will they qualify towards our milestones options purchase requirement, right? So will they be included? Can you include something out of state that you own in your milestones calculations?
So no, the ZEVs must be part of the California fleet, which is defined in the regulation as vehicles that operate in California during a calendar year. This ensures that the emissions benefits that we're getting from the ZEVs are occurring in California, which is where we need them.
Okay, and just so we're basically saying any vehicle in the state, if you have a ZEV in the state, it counts towards your percent requirements, but it's out of the state, it does not, right?
To clarify, any ZEV that enters the state in a calendar year.
Okay.
So if it's based out of state but comes here, it can still count towards your requirement.
Perfect. Okay, then we have one. Do companies get credit for removing units over 8,500 pounds GVWR and replacing them with a smaller ZEV NZEV vehicle that is under the 8,500 pound GVWR threshold?
So if we're talking about the milestones provision, removing vehicles from the fleet may lower the fleet size, which affects compliance. However, ZEVs or NZEVs that are under the GVWR threshold or otherwise outside the vehicle scope of the regulation cannot be used towards compliance. So you can't go out and buy a bunch of light duty Teslas or Chevy Bolts to count towards meeting medium and heavy duty ZEV requirements.
I know we mentioned that earlier. Molly mentioned the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulation, which is where the light duty vehicles are regulated. Okay, and some other questions, more about strategy, milestone strategy. This one is downsizing the overall size of a fleet a viable compliance mechanism when using the milestones option?
It can be. It's all going to be on a fleet by fleet basis, but as long as the fleet is meeting their required ZEV milestone, then you could feasibly reduce the fleet size by selling or scrapping vehicles to, if you already had ZEVs in the fleet, to lower the total obligation down. It's again on a case-by-case basis, and I would recommend using our fleet calculator tool if you're planning on doing anything like that.
Perfect. It's always an interesting question we did with truck and bus, right? If you have 10 vehicles and you remove one, you have 9, and you're running it on a percent calculation, you might not actually change the total number of vehicles you need in that one compliance year. It totally is case by case. I think that's a good question. So next question is, please explain by example how to operate in the model year and milestone schedules simultaneously. I think this will help you. I think you can help clarify an answer to that.
Yeah, you can't really do both simultaneously, but at the time, because the regulation allows you to switch options, at the time of switching, we're going to assess whether the fleet is in compliance with both requirements. So for example, if a fleet wants to switch from the milestones option to the model year schedule, under milestones, it allows them to add combustion vehicles as long as they're hitting their milestones. However, if they want to switch to model year schedule requires that only ZEVs were added to the fleet starting in January 1, 2024. So any combustion vehicles that were added to the fleet that were outside of exemption or extension would probably be required to be removed in order to switch back to the model year schedule. So it's going to depend. We're going to look at both options at the time of the switch. And as long as you've met your milestones and can demonstrate that you would meet the model year schedule when you switch into it, we would allow the switch.
Perfect. Let's see, and a lot of these questions, I mean, a lot of these are directly what we submitted, what people submitted. Some of them have some lightly edited. Okay, here's the next one. How does the milestone option affect municipalities that are already working towards phasing in ZEVs and NZEV fleet assets? Do they get credit for vehicles they've already purchased?
Yeah, so a municipality can only use either the ZEV purchase schedule or the ZEV milestones option, and they must meet the ZEV and NZEV requirements specified by those requirements. So if they are under the ZEV purchase schedule, purchasing ZEVs based on that requirement, and then they switch to ZEV milestones before 2030, then they can count any of those ZEVs towards their ZEV milestone obligation that they've added to the fleet, again, that are within the scope of the regulation. For the ZEV purchase schedule, which is the state and local government requirement, credit is provided for early or excess ZEV additions. So fleets using the ZEV milestones can also count any ZEVs that were purchased prior to switching to milestones towards that milestone requirement.
And I just want to add the switch for the municipalities exercising the ZEV milestone option is permanent. And as Chris mentioned, it has to be done by 2030.
Perfect, thanks, Molly. So let's see, the next one I have, in a corporation, can subsidiaries follow different compliance pathways? So if you're a corporation with multiple subsidiaries, can you do like a milestones on a model year?
So the default actually in the regulation is that corporations that have separate subsidiaries, separate parent companies, or separate joint ventures, that they actually comply separately and report separately. There is an option in the regulation called the corporate joint compliance option, which allows subsidiaries, parent companies, or joint ventures to have the option to comply jointly with only the ZEV milestones option instead of complying independently if the combined fleet meets the requirements of the ZEV milestones option. So, for example, company A owns subsidiary A and B, and all three could combine together to use the ZEV milestones option, but the default is that all three would be reporting and complying separately.
Perfect. And then just one last one I think we have for milestones. Do vehicles that qualify for an exemption have to phase out if they're excluded from the calculations? And then just a reminder, we'll talk about exemptions in detail in a little bit later.
Yeah, so in order to opt into the ZEV milestones option, fleet owners are required to waive their health and safety code protections, which is effectively the useful life of the vehicle, except for those that are purchased under certain exemptions in the regulations. So if you're in the milestones option and you're granted a ZEV purchase exemption, a daily usage exemption, or a mutual aid assistance exemption to purchase a combustion vehicle, those vehicles that are purchased under those granted exemptions would get their full useful life. So just to give a quick example, let's say a fleet had 100 all Group 1 vehicles, and so they're 100% requirements in 2035. And if they were granted an exemption to purchase a combustion vehicle under one of those exemptions, let's just say in 2025, that would still give them 10 years to operate that vehicle until the 100% mark of the milestones hits. If they were not granted an exemption and they just purchased that combustion vehicle on their own without an exemption, that vehicle would have to be removed at the 100% mark in 2035, so they could only operate it for 10 years. But if it was granted an exemption to purchase that combustion vehicle, it could operate for its full useful life, which, as Brandon mentioned earlier, is the minimum of 13 years and up to 800,000 miles or 18 years. But at the end of that period, it would have to be removed because the 100% of the milestones is still in effect. So once that useful life ends for that exempt vehicle, then it would have to be removed from the fleet under the milestones provision.
That's super. That's helpful to learn a little bit more about. Okay. Thanks, Chris. We have just a couple of questions. I have a couple of fuel questions. And so Molly, I have Molly who's gonna help take those couple of questions. So let's see what we have. So here it is. What will be the requirements for fleets to include hydrogen-fueled trucks? Does the rule favor one over the other?
So hydrogen-fueled fuel cell trucks are zero-emission vehicles, and they're treated the same as battery electric trucks, except there's a provision for the daily use exemption that applies only to battery electric trucks.
And then the other question is, how does the ACF rule consider hydrogen-fueled internal combustion engine vehicles? So if you're burning the hydrogen instead of running through a fuel cell.
So hydrogen is considered an alternative fuel, and any vehicle that combusts fuel and has tailpipe emissions is not that.
Okay. And I would note, I think we have, I think we're planning, I'm not sure if we've put it out yet, a workshop on hydrogen ice. I think we've probably agreed to do that in the next couple of months.
Yeah, there will be an announcement made through the Gov delivery through ZEV Fleet for a workshop on hydrogen ice vehicles as well as hydrogen fuel cell vehicles.
Okay, and then we have a couple more, a little bit on, I think we have just one more on alt fuels. This question we have, is definitely from wastewater fleet, but we have all CNG trucks in our fleet. Do we follow all the same requirements as diesel trucks, right? Are we differentiating between a CNG and a diesel truck in this rule?
No, compressed natural gas trucks are treated the same as all combustion trucks in this rule, and unless your fleet qualifies for a delay because they're involved in waste and wastewater They are a waste and wastewater fleet involved in organic diversion regulation, and they could apply for the provision.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, you mentioned that. You mentioned in the question earlier, the requirements for that for vehicles using CNG vehicles using the biogas. Okay. Perfect, thanks, Molly. I think we're going to bring, we'll go ahead and bring Chris back. All right, Chris, so the next set of questions that we have, they really are far more around common ownership and control. I know as we've talked with people over the last few months, it's always sort of, there's always room for clarification of what we're talking about. So hopefully you can help us out with some of those. So hang on one second, let me catch up on the questions. And Chris, I'm going to use our questions document. We are a broker. Are our dedicated carriers considered part of our fleet? They're independent and run under their own authority.
So generally, we're going to need more information than that to determine whether common ownership and control applies. But generally, what I can do here is actually read the definition of common ownership and control. It means being owned or managed on a day-to-day basis by the same person or entities. Vehicles managed by the same directors, officers, or managers, or by distinct corporations controlled by the same majority stockholders are under common ownership and control, even if their titles are held by different business entities or they have different taxpayer ID numbers. A vehicle is under an entity's control if the vehicle is operated using that entity's state or federal operating authority or other registration. Vehicles owned by different entities but operated using common or shared resources to manage the day-to-day operations, such as using the same motor carrier number, displaying the same name or logo, or that are owned by contractors whose services are under the day-to-day control of that hiring entity, are considered under common ownership or control. Common ownership and control includes relationships where the controlling party has the right to direct or control the vehicle as to the details of when, where, and how work is to be performed, or where expenses for operating the vehicles, such as fuel or insurance, are shared. It does not include agreements for individual loads that are competitively bid and issued to the lowest qualifying bid. So just a summary of this, effectively, we're looking at vehicles that are controlled on the day-to-day basis by the same entity. So a common example we like to use is UPS owns all of their own vehicles. FedEx contracts with a number of owner-operators, but controls the day-to-day operations of those vehicles. We would consider those contractors with FedEx, where FedEx tells the vehicles every day where to go, where to be, what time to be there. All of those vehicles have the FedEx logo on the side of their truck. We're considering those under common ownership control. So that's going to give probably the best example without getting into further fleet-specific details as to how this would apply.
Perfect. Yeah, it was very much case by case, that's for sure. Some other related questions. If a large fleet operator outsources fleet operations, what are the impacts of that? Very broad questions. Maybe you can narrow them down a little bit.
Yeah, so if they meet the definition of common ownership or control and are a controlling party, then they must include those commonly controlled vehicles as part of their fleet and compliance obligation. If they're hiring fleets that are not considered under common ownership and control, but they're meeting the definition of a hired entity where the hiring entity is controlling the vehicles or is operating the vehicles themselves, then the hiring requirements may apply, where they have to verify if the fleet they're hiring is compliant with ACF or not and provide a hiring disclosure. Beyond that, it would be up to the large fleet whether or not they wanted to outsource. But if they are exhibiting that level of control where either the hiring requirements or the common ownership and control requirements come into play, then they may have requirements under the ACF regulation related to that hiring relationship.
Perfect. And then one more on common ownership, and this one is: does ACF regulation apply to owner-operator entities contracted under large carrier operations? So if I'm an owner-operator, I guess, and I'm contracting myself to a large carrier, what do we need to do? I think we touched on this a little bit earlier.
Yeah, so under the high priority fleets, again, because owner operators could potentially be subject to the drayage portion of the rule, but focusing answers here on high priority fleets, ACF only sets requirements on the controlling party. So the controlling party has to ensure that their fleet is upgraded to ZEVs, including those under common ownership and control. So that means that the individual owner operator does not have to individually upgrade their vehicle to a ZEV, but if their vehicle is considered part of a larger fleet under common ownership and control, that controlling party may require them to upgrade to a ZEV, may incentivize that owner operator to upgrade to a ZEV, or may stop working with that owner operator if the owner operator cannot transition to ZEV. So the regulation doesn't apply to the owner operator, it applies to the controlling party, and it's up to the controlling party to work out how compliance will work with their owner operators.
Perfect. I think that's an important one for people to understand it, so if you're a smaller fleet contracting on. So thank you for that one. We have a question. I'm going to skip to this one a little bit sort of out of country, so a little change of pace. This one is, we are a company in Mexico and need to cross material between Calexico on the California side and Mexicali on the Baja California side, but we do not hire a fleet. Are we subject to the ACF rule? Is this common ownership and control, right? So the basically you're saying, hey, we don't own any vehicles, but we hire people to move our materials across the border. How does this impact us? I think is that core question.
Sure. So we had a meeting down at the border a few months back where similar questions were asked. And in the end, again, it's all going to come down to the specific fleet situation. So we'll probably need more specific details than what this question provides to determine whether this is common ownership control. However, generally, we can say that if you, as the company in Mexico that's hiring these fleets, or that is not hiring the fleet, but who's hiring the services to cross the material, if you control the day-to-day operations of those fleets or of that trucking company that's moving the material, then you may be considered the controlling party. And this depends on how many vehicles are under your common ownership control, whether or not you make over 50 million in revenue, whether the ACF regulation even applies to you. But you know, these are details that we'll need to assess that situation.
Yeah, and I think that one, you had the question, it was a Mexican cross-border fleet example, but I think that it doesn't actually matter, right? That it's out of country or cross-border operator, right? Chris, it would apply to anybody hiring the fleet service.
That is correct. So if you were based exclusively in Mexico, but you're hiring entities that are bringing trucks into California and they are under your common ownership control, we would look at to see whether you would be subject to ACF as a controlling party.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Hopefully that helps clarify some of those situations. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to switch gears from more that common ownership side of things. We'll touch on it a small amount in reporting, but if you do have your very specific examples, right, feel free to email us. I know today we just can't get into like everybody's little example. I know I got some emails from people that were like multi-pages long with their question, but hopefully that gives everybody a pretty decent understanding of what we're thinking and talking about common ownership. So let me jump over to I think some sort of the out-of-state engines. We had several questions about this. So this one is, can a carrier continue to purchase out-of-state diesel-powered vehicles in 2024? How will the omnibus requirements for new internal combustion engine vehicles in high priority fleets for outside of California registrations work, and are they considered compliant? So that's a mouthful. Do you think you can help us sort through some of that?
Yeah, so Section 2015R of the High Priority Federal Fleets Regulation covers requirements when adding combustion engines to the fleet. We're not going to get into specifics about that today, but you can view a fact sheet that we have posted on the ACF website, as well as an enforcement discretion letter related to that fact sheet and this requirement posted on the ACF page. You can go to the fact sheets page on the ACF page for the fact sheet and to the resources link off the ACF page for the enforcement discretion letter. And the requirements are in the regulation language itself.
Chris, let me follow up a little bit. So people were asking, hey, if I buy a truck, but let's say I buy a truck, starting in 2024, it has to be California standards, what essentially we're saying, correct? And then
so the 2015R requirements are that when adding a combustion vehicle to the California fleet, when it's allowed, so that would be either under exemption or under the Milestones option for high priority fleets and under the state and local ZEV purchase schedule, then those ones could be added between 24 and 26. Basically, we require that if it's a 24 or newer model year engine that's added to the California fleet, it must be certified to California emission standards. And so for fleets based in California, for fleets that for fleets that are buying new vehicles here, that's generally not going to be something you need to worry about. But for out-of-state fleets purchasing engines from out of state and then bringing them to operate in California, that's where these requirements you may need to pay more attention to these requirements and double check those fact sheets and enforcement discretion letters.
Perfect. I know with the truck investor, I've definitely talked to a lot of the people over the years who were buying trucks and flying and picking them up and driving them to California. So this is a warning. Make sure you're careful when you're buying your vehicles going forward. I think would be my commentary. Okay. We had a question. Yeah.
Sorry, Brandon, I just wanted to jump in on what you just said. So there is a notice of disclosure required for this regulation. So the disclosure is required for dealers that are selling these vehicles if they're subject to. So we'll talk about that more later.
Yeah, it's important. We have reporting. We'll talk about, I think, disclosure a little bit. That's a good point.
Yeah, and that sales disclosure does apply to anybody subject to the regulation, selling of vehicles subject to the regulation, not just dealers.
Okay, I think we'll talk about that a little bit more later on, but make sure we do. So I wanted to ask you, we're almost through this set of questions, then we'll take a break. How does the rule impact leased or rented vehicles? So leased vehicle rental question mark.
Yeah, so the regulation sets requirements for vehicles based on who is considered the fleet owner. The fleet owner is defined in the regulation, and subpart B of that definition addresses leased and rental vehicles. Generally, leased or rental vehicles are the responsibility of the renting or leasing entity. If the lease or rental agreement is for a year or longer, and that contract specifies that the renter or lessee is responsible for compliance with state laws with that vehicle, then the lessee or renter is responsible for that vehicle and must include it as part of their fleet.
Perfect, thanks. So the litmus test is the 1 year, right?
It's 1 year, and the contract must specify that the lessee is responsible.
Okay, otherwise it defaults to the lessor.
That's correct.
Okay. Perfect, thanks for that. Hopefully that clarifies. I don't see him here. Do you want to maybe briefly mention, I know you can do it, the reporting for any companies that lease vehicles? Can you quickly mention the quarterly reporting requirement for that?
So that only applies to interstate rental vehicles, and we'll probably want to cover that when we get to the rental questions. But generally, there is a rental provision in the high priority fleets regulation for those using the Milestones option only, and for those that qualify as interstate rental fleet owners. There is an option in that regulation to address the transient nature of some rental vehicles that go in and out of state, where the renting agency may not have visibility over vehicles that are brought in. And so when trying to determine the Milestones calculation, there would be more difficulty in potentially having to inflate their fleet size because of the nature of vehicles coming in and out. So there is an option in the regulation for them to report 4 quarterly snapshots of the number of rental vehicles that are effectively in California at any given time during the year. And then they would base their milestone provision calculations based off of that annual average that's reported.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, got my questions slightly out of order because that was the next question to ask. Inter versus interstate operations. Yeah, and then the last one more question. The quarterly snapshots. I think you touched on that. Okay, let me switch really quickly over. Chris, anything else on these vehicles that you want to say before I move on?
Not on the rentals, no.
Okay, cool. So we had a number of agricultural vehicle related questions. So basically it summarizes, are there any ag exemptions in this regulation? We had an exemption in the truck and bus rule for a number of years. So is anything in the ACF regulations for ag?
Nothing specific for ag.
Okay. So nothing specific for ag. We'll talk about the provisions in the next section. So vehicles certainly and fleets may fall under those, but not a specific ag provision. And then the last one I have before we take a break, what about off-highway vehicles that don't go down the road, or have like special equipment SE plated vehicles like a water truck or something like that?
So generally the regulations are going to apply to on-road vehicles. So those are originally built for on-road use, typically have on-road certified engines. So if it's originally designed for on-road use, but you just happen to use it exclusively off-road, such as water trucks on a farm, those are still going to be included in the regulation. We are also including any off-road yard tractors for high priority fleets. So those would be yard tractors that have off-road certified engines as well. And the only equipment that we're not including would be your typical off-road equipment, things like backhoes, tractors, bulldozers, things like that.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, that's everything for this section. So we're gonna take a break. We'll come back. Let's come back at, right now it's at 10:32, so let's take 10 minutes. We'll come back at 10:42. And then next up, we'll go through the extensions and the exemptions. A bunch of questions on those. We'll dive a little bit into the record and reporting requirements, and then I'll show you some helpful resources. All right, so I'll see you in about 9 minutes. Thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and get going. Hopefully we'll have enough time at the end. That Molly will be able to live demo us some of these different tools that are available. Okay, so we're going to talk about next. We just talked a little bit about high priority fleets, state and local government, and then the various compliance options, model year, and the milestones. So now we're going to go through some of the extensions and exemptions. We'll talk about then we'll talk about reporting, and then we'll talk a little bit about some resources for you. And we're gonna have Yusuf back, and he is gonna take us through these next couple of sections. So let me turn it over to Yusuf.
Thank you, Brandon. So the next slide we'll go over is the provision summary slide.
Yeah, let me get you there for you. There you go.
Great, thank you, Brandon. So the Advanced Clean Fleet Regulation contains a number of provisions that a fleet owner may utilize in assistance with meeting compliance requirements. These provisions address a variety of circumstances, including ZEV availability, vehicles operated for less than 1,000 miles per year, delays in infrastructure, vehicles involved in accidents, vehicles under mutual aid agreements, meeting daily usage needs, waste and wastewater transition, and more. We've received questions on many of these provisions, and we'll go over them, but just to let you know, you can find more information on these provisions on various fact sheets that we have on our website. But for now, let's go over some of the submitted questions regarding the provisions. Let me go to this section here. So for the next few questions, we'll go to Molly for those. These are the exemptions and extensions provisions. The first couple of questions are regarding vehicle delivery delay. The first question, what happens if I order my zero-emission vehicle and the manufacturer has a delay in obtaining parts?
So not all of the provisions listed on the slide here apply to every single fleet. So this vehicle delivery delay can be used by all of the fleets, though, drayage, high priority, and state and local government agencies that have permanently opted into the ZEV milestone option. If a state and local agency is remaining in their rule, the state and local government agency rule, and have not opted in, they're following the ZEV purchase schedule, and those do not need to use this extension because it's a they're not following a replacement requirement.
Great, thank you.
So you would just need to apply for it.
Awesome, thank you, Molly. Next question, does immediate delivery upon completion suffice in a contract?
The intent of the immediate delivery addition was so that fleet owners could not intentionally delay their delivery of ZEVs to avoid the regulation requirements.
Okay, great.
So yes.
Great, thank you, Molly. Next questions are relating to infrastructure delays. And for that, we'll go to Molly again. Do I need to request an extension if my ZEV installation project is delayed?
Again, just to reiterate, so infrastructure delays, the ZEV infrastructure delay extension is available to all fleets, so drayage, state and local governments, and high priority fleets. If your fleet is already in compliance and the delay does not prevent your fleet from meeting any upcoming compliance deadline, then there's no reason for you to apply for this extension. You do need to take action a year ahead of your next compliance schedule in order to qualify for this delay. You have to follow the extension application criteria. And it really just depends on site-specific information and also the composition of your fleet as to what you would get when you apply for this extension. Like how many vehicles would qualify is on a case-by-case basis.
Perfect, thank you, Molly. The next question, what happens when an EV charging infrastructure project my fleet is relying on is experiencing a delay and I need to be in compliance? And then the second part of the question is, and what about utility delays?
So if you do need this extension to remain in compliance, then you again would need to have started your project or have had construction permits 1 year ahead of the next compliance deadline. And the delays are due to circumstances outside of control. For a utility delay, you just need information from the utility that supports your claim. And the extension period is based on the number of vehicles receiving the extension is based on the specific situation and how much time the utility determines it will take to supply the required power to your site.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question, what types of delays are eligible for ZEV infrastructure delay extension?
There are two primary categories of delays that are eligible for this extension. As we talked about earlier, it's a construction-related delay that happens after you've started construction or after you've gotten the construction permit, and the construction permit itself has to be issued 1 year prior to the next compliance deadline. Some of the issues that you may run into that are outside of your control and that you could apply for this construction-related delay are delays in the manufacturing and shipping of zero-emission vehicle fueling infrastructure equipment, so EVSE, delays due to a change of a general contractor, delays in obtaining enough power from the utility after the construction begins, delays due to unexpected safety issues at the construction site, discovery of archaeological, historical, or tribal cultural resources as you are doing construction at your site, and natural disasters. The second delay that qualifies under this infrastructure delay is before you start construction at your site and you're not able to get the required power to your site. These extensions are called site electrification delays, and you need to have talked to the utility a year before your next compliance deadline to qualify. These types of delays that happen before construction begins, they sunset on January 1st, 2030. And I think there was another part of that question.
Yeah, so the second part or to that was, does a third party owned site matter?
And the answer is no. Site control has no impact on this this delay extension. So they're not treated any differently in this regulation than the site that's under the full control of the regulated entity.
Great, thank you. The next question is, what about fleets who have placed orders under and are unable to find battery electric vehicle charging or hydrogen fueling to support the zero emission vehicle fleet?
So unless the fleet owner has already initiated a project at least 1 year ahead of their next compliance date, then and they are experiencing one of the delays I mentioned earlier, then they would not qualify for this ZEV infrastructure delay. A third-party ZEV infrastructure vendor can provide information to a regulated entity that could allow them to qualify for the ZEV infrastructure delay, but it is on the same terms as if the site were in their control or that they owned the site and operated it. So the fleet owner would have had to enter into a contract of 1 year or longer to charge their or fuel their ZEVs at that third party's single fueling or charging location prior to the beginning of the infrastructure project in order to qualify. And then, we require a copy of the contract showing the agreement with a third party, and the fueling location will need to be submitted as part of the extension application. Multiple fleets utilizing a common site can also submit a joint application.
Great, thank you. The next question, for ZEV infrastructure delay, how can I determine what the maximum number of ZEVs the utility can support at any shared site?
The utility is expected to identify the capacity it can deliver to the site and when it can make those upgrades. This information, along with the fleet owner's project plans for the site, will be used to determine how many vehicles can be supported and how many cannot.
Great.
Can I
Thank you,
jump in
Molly.
real quick, Yusuf and Molly? Molly, you were saying something, and I want to just maybe put a finer point on it. If there's a utility delay, I think we were saying you still have to basically electrify, upgrade what is available. Like if you can, let's say you have a project and it's 10 trucks and you can't get all 10 vehicles, but you can get 5. We're gonna potentially let you do 5, but we would exempt you from the other 5 under the delay. Is that my understanding correct?
Right, so there will be a determination made as to what the site can support and cannot support and how many vehicles need to be in compliance, and we will be working with the applicant and the utility to make that determination.
Okay, cool, thank you.
So the next question is regarding ZEV purchase exemption. For those, we'll go to Chris. What if vehicles needed are not yet commercially available?
Yeah, so the ZEV purchase exemption exists to address a scenario outside of a fleet owner's control that a ZEV in a needed configuration or an NZEV in a needed configuration is not available to purchase by a fleet. And we do define in the regulation the conditions that we are using to determine what we consider available to purchase. If you give me just one moment here, I will read those out. Okay, so if a manufacturer comes to market and offers a ZEV to a fleet, if they've applied for the ZEV purchase exemption and they claim that they can make that ZEV, we're going to consider, if applicable, whether the vehicle was certified to California's zero-emission powertrain certification requirements. 2, whether the ZEVs or NZEVs offered have a model year that is 18 months or less from the date the fleet owner submitted the exemption request. So we're not going to consider ZEVs that are 2 or more years out in model year to be commercially available. ZEVs or NZEVs that are must not be solely for demonstration, test, or experimental purposes. So we won't consider demo or experimental vehicles to be available to purchase. ZEVs or NZEVs cannot be offered as a temporary placeholder for a vehicle that may or may not be offered for sale in the future. So this covers things like where Tesla opened their pre-order book for their Cybertruck years in advance and the vehicles are still not commercially available. We're not going to consider a pre-order as available to purchase. And last, ZEVs or NZEVs do not conflict with safety standards that the fleet owner is subject to, if applicable, as prescribed under the California Department of Industrial Relations, Occupational Health and Safety Codes, or any comparable federal or state and health safety laws where the vehicle operates, or federal highway safety laws. The fleet owner would have to identify which of these safety laws or standards would be in conflict and for what reasons in their application. But generally, those are the only criteria that we can consider. We have gotten a lot of questions about, can you consider manufacturer choice? No. Can we consider cost of the vehicle? No. Infrastructure availability? No. And we also aren't going to consider choice of fuel, where fleet may have invested already in battery electric, but if a fuel cell vehicle is available, we're going to make them buy the fuel cell electric vehicle. So those are the criteria provided in the regulation that we can consider.
Great, thank you, Chris. I also wanted to mention the ZEV purchase exemption does not apply to drayage vehicles. That was, we had received a few of those questions.
Correct.
The next question regarding ZEV purchase exemption, what is the process when you're unable to purchase a zero-emission vehicle?
So we will be publishing a ZEV purchase exemption list on the ACF website no later than January 1st, 2025, and that's per the regulation. We currently are working on that list, but don't have an estimated date of when it's going to be available. So there's two ways to go about it. One, when we publish the list, fleets would go to that list, and if they qualify, because there are qualifications to use this exemption, to prove that the vehicle actually needs to be replaced by a combustion vehicle. If they qualify, they would go to the list. If a vehicle is listed on there in the configuration and weight class needed, they would be able to just go ahead and purchase that vehicle as a combustion vehicle with no application needed to CARB, and they would just report the vehicle when they receive it and identify which vehicle is being replaced by it when reporting. Now, until that list is published, and after the list is published, if there's something on the list that the fleet still feels like or something that's not on the list that the fleet feels like they can't get in the ZEV configuration, they can go through the ZEV purchase exemption application process. And that's laid out in the regulation. And effectively, what that requires is that fleets gather some information about the vehicle they need, or the vehicle being replaced effectively, the frame attachments that vehicle needs to do its job, the make and model of the needed body, and then they would have to get statements from 2 or more ZEV manufacturers that those manufacturers cannot make the needed ZEV. We will take that information, solicit it to see if any manufacturer or bodybuilder can configure a needed vehicle within this criteria specified in the regulation. And if not, the exemption could be approved. To apply for that application process, all this information has to be submitted through truckers at arb.ca.gov. And specific questions about that process, most of that information is laid out in the regulation. We are working on fact sheets and a checklist to help guide people through that process. So right now we do not have that available, but we are hoping to make that available sometime within the next couple months here.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
We have a few more ZEV purchase exemption questions. Next one, will owners of internal combustion engine vehicles on the purchase exemption list be required to apply for an exemption? And the second part, is there an infeasibility form for this?
So the question is, owners of ICE vehicles on the purchase list be required to apply for an exemption. So again, once we publish the list, if a vehicle is listed, the idea is that fleet owners will be able to go to that list, buy the combustion vehicle they need without having to apply for an exemption through CARB. They will be required to qualify. So I guess I should touch on this now. In order to get a ZEV purchase exemption, you have to show that the vehicles are qualified, and it depends on which compliance option the fleet is taking. So if the fleet is taking the model year schedule, which is under high priority fleets, they would have to show that the vehicle being replaced is at least 16 years old or has reached 700,000 miles, because otherwise they could just continue operating that existing combustion vehicle until the end of its useful life, and we don't want to be approving exemptions that are not necessary for compliance. If the fleet is following the ZEV purchase schedule, which is for state and local government fleets, they would be required to be replacing a vehicle that is at least 13 years old, again, to show that exemption's actually necessary and not just replacing brand new vehicles that could be operated longer. And last, if they're under the ZEV Milestones option, they would have to show that no other combustion vehicle in the fleet could be upgraded to a ZEV because of the flexibility of that option, which allows any vehicle to be upgraded to a ZEV in the fleet to meet the requirement. So they would have to actually apply for and obtain exemptions for all other combustion vehicles in their California fleet under the ZEV Milestones option before being qualified to apply for a ZEV purchase exemption. Last part of that question was a infeasibility form. There is no technical infeasibility exemption in the regulation. The daily usage exemption may be a surrogate for something like that based on the range or daily energy use, but the concept for that exemption is a ZEV is available to purchase based on our criteria, but it can't meet the demonstrated daily range or energy usage needs of the vehicles in the fleet.
Great, thank you, Chris. Got a couple more under that section. So the next one, will we be required to purchase vehicles that are not being mass produced, experimental, or just to meet the purchasing requirements?
So as we went over this earlier, no, the ZEV purchase exemption would not consider test, demonstration, or experimental vehicles as available to purchase. However, mass produced is kind of, it's an undefined term. So, I mean, if a manufacturer is offering a production model just in low volumes, we would still require a fleet to go purchase it.
Thank you. Next question, will fuel suppliers be exempt for compliance under worker safety considerations and dangers using electric trucks and fuel?
Well, we don't believe that there's inherently anything more dangerous about using an electric truck than any other combustion truck, but for the ZEV purchase exemption, we did build in requirements, what we would consider available to purchase, to include safety conflicts. So, for example, if you needed a truck that is UL certified and there is no ZEV available that meets that safety standard, then you could apply for an exemption under the ZEV unavailable or the ZEV purchase exemption application process and cite the safety standards that show that you're required to have a UL certified truck to go into fueling racks and things like that.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
So the next couple of questions are relating to the unavailability list. Just wanted to note that the unavailability list does not apply to drayage. So for these questions, we'll go to Chris again. Where will the list be located? When will it be up, and how often will it be updated?
So the list is going to be located on the CARB ACF website. We don't currently have a link for it because we have not published it yet. It will be up no later than January 1st, 2025 per the regulation. And how often will it be updated? Once it's up, we'll be updating it continuously, but per the regulation, when we do discover that a vehicle is available as a ZEV and want to remove a vehicle from the list, we will post notice on our website and remove the vehicle 6 months after posting it publicly. So just as an example, if we discover that there's a ZEV concrete pump truck and it needs to come off the list, then we would post that on our website, and then 6 months later, we would remove it from the list. So this gives fleets an opportunity to kind of get in within that 6 months window to purchase that vehicle.
Great, thank you. Next question is, how does one go about having a certain type of truck added to this list?
So we don't have a official process for adding something to the ZEV purchase exemption list. We'll be developing that through our conversations with manufacturers, bodybuilders, and what we know about the market to date. However, we are going to use the ZEV purchase exemption application process to help inform the list and add or remove vehicles from the list. So if somebody goes through a ZEV purchase exemption application and there's a vehicle that's on the list and a manufacturer says, hey, we can make this vehicle now, that's somebody going through that process will trigger us to remove that vehicle from the list 6 months afterwards. Something to consider is that market availability does not factor into the ZEV purchase exemption list. Only vehicles that are not considered available to purchase per the criteria laid out in the regulation would be listed on there.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Now we're going to move on to daily usage exemptions. Again, just note this does not apply to drayage vehicles. So the first for that, we'll go also to Chris again. And the first question is if an available ZEV has a very limited range that cannot meet the day's work, what option is available?
Yeah, so the purpose of the daily usage exemption is for when a ZEV is available but cannot meet the fleet's demonstrated daily usage needs. There has to be, they have to meet qualifications, of course. The vehicle being replaced must be qualified, very similar to ZEV purchase exemption, where under model year schedule, it has to be at least 16 years old. Under ZEV purchase schedule for state and local governments, it has to be at least 13 years old. And if you're using ZEV milestones, the vehicle being replaced, you'd have to show that no other combustion vehicles in the fleet could be replaced with a ZEV. And the fleet must already be at 10% ZEVs to apply for this. So that does mean that we are expecting fleets to actually attempt to incorporate ZEVs into their fleet and manage their operations to incorporate ZEVs before applying for exemptions based on limited ZEV range. A number of criteria, of course, must be met to show that the exemption is needed or warranted, and this includes things like showing us a 30-day mileage report for all other vehicles of the same type in the fleet, to show us that no other vehicle in the fleet could be transitioned to a ZEV, and that all of the vehicles remaining in the fleet are have too high of a daily range need that the ZEV could not meet.
So can I jump in real quick? Chris, one of the common questions we've heard, and I'm just putting you on the spot, but I think you can answer it. I had somebody who, let's say they have workers who live in the high desert north of the South Coast Basin, and they're driving down like along the coast, right? Like a Lancaster down into Long Beach. And they say, hey, I have that, my guys need to fuel at home. How does this provision potentially help those situations, or how would we look at that would be sort of my open question.
I guess for that specific scenario, you could maybe look at range to consider whether daily usage would apply, but it would be range for all vehicles of the same type in the fleet. In terms of publicly available fueling, or the need to fuel at home, we would expect fleets to manage that, either fuel the vehicles at a centrally located depot, incentivize your employees who are taking the vehicles home to install home charging where they could charge the vehicles, things like that. But there's nothing explicit related to home charging in the regulation.
Okay, thanks for that. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Brandon and Chris. The next question is there a standard percent of use for over under the daily drive miles minimums or averages which dictate an exemption?
Yeah, so the regulation specifies all the criteria. So again, we would essentially need a mileage report for all other vehicles of the same configuration in the fleet for 30 consecutive days, and you could select what 30 days that are within the last year. You would need to throw out the three highest mileage readings, and if an available ZEVs range, and you would have to be looking at a ZEV with the maximum battery pack, cannot meet the remaining readings for all of the vehicles in the fleet, the exemption could be granted. Otherwise, the fleet has to purchase the ZEV and incorporate it where it can meet the daily needs. Fleet owners are expected to adjust their operations to incorporate ZEVs into their fleet. For daily energy usage, either daily energy usage calculated per the regulation or daily mileage can be used to demonstrate need for this exemption. So this does include not just range, but if you have vehicles that are operating PTO all day, like refuse vehicles, or running an auger to dig holes all day, then you could use the energy usage calculation specified in the regulation to also qualify for this exemption.
The next question we'll move on to is backup vehicle exemption. For backup vehicle exemptions, just note that excludes vehicles operated less than 1,000 miles per year. So the question that came in for that was, how will regulations affect low use exempt trucks? Is there a backup vehicle exemption?
Yeah, so the low use exemption is a term related to the truck and bus regulation, or possibly the off-road equipment regulation. It doesn't have any bearing on the ACF regulation. For ACF, we do have a backup vehicle exemption, which, as Yusuf mentioned, is in the regulation for vehicles that operate less than 1,000 miles a year. But it is it's similar to the low use, but it is different. It does not apply to drayage. The low use exemption for truck and bus allowed 1,000 miles operation in California with unlimited mileage elsewhere. The backup vehicle exemption is not the same in ACF. It only allows up to 1,000 miles total, and that's anywhere, California or otherwise. And there's a difference in record keeping and reporting.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. The next set of questions are relating to reporting and truckers. But before we go to those questions, let's cover our next PowerPoint slide.
Can I say real quick, before we jump into the next slide, we ran through a fair number of the provisions, and we mentioned before, we have detailed fact sheets on these. I think my commentary to a fleet manager, if you think these really do apply to your situation, I would definitely encourage you to pull up the actual rule language on our website and read through that specific text of language. It's probably the best single source to know exactly what we're looking for, what you potentially need to report or send to us as well. Because as much detail as Molly and Chris just gave on these provisions, it's still just a summary, and there's still nuances in there that I don't want anybody to mix up. So just FYI on that. I'll let you go ahead and give us some reporting information.
Thank you. Very good point there. Sure. So the next slide we'll be talking about is on reporting. There were a lot of questions regarding reporting and record keeping requirements. And let's go through some of the requirements first. As we mentioned earlier, we'll be using the truck regulation upload compliance and reporting system, also known as truckers. Many of you are familiar with the system from the truck and bus reporting over the years. We are in the process of updating the reporting system for the Advanced Clean Fleet regulation, and you'll be able to use existing truckers accounts and usernames to log in and update information. Here's a screenshot of the landing page after you log in and the address to the page. This link is right off the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation main webpage. Currently, the drayage component for this system is online, and we're working on the state and local government and high priority fleet systems. We are also developing new reporting guides that will give you step-by-step instructions and screenshots to help with reporting. We will send out notifications when these are made available. Next slide, please. Thank you. Upcoming reporting dates. Here are some key upcoming reporting dates for the Advanced Clean Fleet regulation based on category. Let's run through these. Note, these cover most situations, but there may be a few nuances with different requirements and dates that exist. For drayage fleets, reporting legacy vehicle is due no later than December 31st, 2023. For state and local governments, the initial reporting deadline is April 1st, 2024. And for high priority fleets, the initial reporting deadline is February 1st, 2024. Any changes to your fleet need to be reported within 30 days. Ongoing reporting requirements depend on the category and situation. The milestone option can be selected in the reporting system each year. For high priority fleets, you can switch between ZEV milestones and model year schedule until 2030, but need to stay compliant at all times to do so. For state and local government fleets, you also have until 2030 to opt into the milestone schedule, but once state and local government opt in, they cannot switch back. It's a permanent option. So let's go through some of these reporting questions that came in. Go to those. So for those, again, we'll go back to Chris for for these. The first reporting question, how and where do we register? Do we keep the same trucker's ID and login? Is the reporting system online?
Yeah, so the reporting system is online. It's going to be done through the truckers reporting system. That's Truck Regulation Upload Compliance and Reporting System. And it's what many fleets have been using for truck and bus reporting over the years. So if you have an existing trucker's ID and login, you can and likely should use the same ID and consolidate your fleet into a single account if there are more than one. Drayage reporting for ACF is currently online right now. However, high priority fleets and state and local government, we're still working on updating truckers to accept reporting for those regulations, and it'll open in the coming months. Notifications will be sent out on our listserv when the system's available, so please sign up for more information for when that when reporting for high priority fleets and state and local governments will go live.
Great, thank you. The next reporting question, what kind of information typically needs to be reported, and do I need to report annually?
So there's a lot of information that needs to be reported, so I would direct people to go look at the associated reporting sections of the regulation language that they're subject to for full details. But generally, fleet and vehicle information and information about compliance options needs to be reported. And yes, you do need to report annually, and you need to update any changes to the fleet within 30 days of those changes occurring. So if you remove vehicles or add them to the fleet, then you would need to report that within 30 days of it occurring.
Perfect, thank you. Next question, do small fleets need to report?
So if they're subject to the drayage truck requirements, yes. And I guess small state and local government fleets also need to report. For high priority fleets, if under the control of a controlling party, but they're not subject to ACF otherwise, the small fleet may have to provide information to their controlling party for that entity to be able to report the small fleet's vehicle in the controlling party's account as is required. But other than that, there would be no requirements on the small fleet under high priority fleets if they're not otherwise subject to ACF.
Thank you. So the next question, it's a two-part question. Do we need to notify CARB of which regulation we are electing to comply with? And then the second part is, how do I opt into the different programs, milestones, phase-in pathways versus ZEV additions pathways?
So there's going to be questions to identify which portion of ACF a fleet's subject to when you initially report, and which compliance option that you are going to elect to use. So again, those features are not quite ready. So we're targeting a late fall, early winter release for the version of truckers, which will ask those questions. But yes, we will have questions to correctly put you into the compliance option that you want to follow.
Great, thank you. The next question, we are confused about which units to register. What about units based in other states that may only travel to California on a limited basis?
For drayage, any affected vehicle that operates in the seaports and intermodal rail yards must be reported. So regardless of if they're from out of state or otherwise. For state and local governments and high priority fleets, same thing applies. Any affected vehicle that's in the California fleet, which is defined in the regulation as vehicles that operate in California during a calendar year. So you would need to report any vehicle that crosses into California's borders during a calendar year. There is a 5-day pass, which you would, again, have to report for. But if you anticipate a vehicle coming into California from another state, and you know at least 5 days in advance, you can report for a 5-day pass to allow that vehicle to enter California without affecting your compliance obligations. But you still have to report for it and be qualified for it.
Perfect, thanks. So the next question, how to report for the various exemptions?
So some exemptions require information during reporting. Some require separate application process through the trucker's email line. Specifics for each exemption are written into the regulation, and we'll have more information about extension and exemption applications in fact sheets and checklists available on our website. Not yet, but sometime over the next couple months.
Great, thank you, Chris. The next question, is the trucker's online reporting system different from Clean Truck Check?
Yes, this is a different reporting system and a different regulation, so they are not related to each other.
Perfect. What guidance is available to walk me through this?
So information is going to be available on the ACF registration and reporting webpage. We'll be developing guidance materials, including a how to report guide. We may potentially have some video modules to help people walk through through reporting. But right now, we don't have anything because most of the information is not ready for reporting yet. But once it's open for high priority and state and local governments, we'll have all that information. For drayage fleets that are reporting now, again, if you go to the registration and reporting webpage off of the ACF main homepage, there is a link for drayage vehicles with detailed instructions on how to report for the drayage portion of ACF today.
Great. Okay, perfect. So the next question that came in, who needs to report for leased and rental vehicles?
So whoever's considered the fleet owner per subpart B of that definition, like we discussed earlier, effectively, if the rental or lease is under a year, the rental or leasing company is responsible for reporting and compliance. If it's longer than a year and the contract specifies that the lessee or renter is responsible for compliance with state laws, then the renter or lessee would report and comply with that vehicle.
Perfect. So the next question, what will happen if a truck is registered in the trucker's online reporting system, but does not run any mileage in California?
So for drayage vehicles, they have to visit seaports or intermodal rail yards in California at least once per year to remain in the drayage system. So if they don't run any mileage in California, and they, I believe, would be removed from the drayage portion of the reporting system. For state and local governments or high priority fleets, vehicles can be reported and will remain a part of the legacy fleet even if they are not operated in California during a year. Reporting the vehicle does indicate that it is part of the California fleet, which is defined as vehicles that operate here during a calendar year. For ZEV milestones option, this could inflate the number of ZEVs needed if a vehicle is not removed that never operates in California again. But for the model year schedule, the vehicles would need to be removed at the end of their useful life from the system, but there's no requirement to operate them in California during a calendar year. So depends on the option that you're in. If you're in model year schedule, it could be beneficial to have a larger legacy fleet that could come into California by reporting vehicles that might not operate here. For the ZEV milestones option, probably not as beneficial to report vehicles that don't operate here because that would inflate your fleet size and the number of ZEVs that you need to meet compliance.
Great, thank you. So continuing on, the next question, when we retire a truck from the service, do we need to remove it from the trucker's online reporting system?
Yes, within 30 days of it being sold, scrapped, or transferred out of state, you would need to report that removal from the California fleet within 30 days and record keep to show that it's been removed from the California fleet.
Okay. The next question, can I use the trucker's online reporting system on my phone? Is there an app?
You can use it on your phone, but there may be some limited functionality or visibility. There is not a separate trucker's app.
Perfect, thank you. What if I have 1,000 vehicles to upload?
Yeah, so we do have a large fleet upload tool that we're working on to assist with uploading large numbers of vehicles at the same time. I believe we anticipate that being ready around the time of the high priority fleets version of truckers launch, again, late fall, early winter.
Okay, great. We have one more record keeping question. What are the record keeping requirements?
It's a very broad question. There's lots of record keeping requirements similar to the reporting requirements. So the first answer is go look at the regulation. Towards the end of each regulation section, we have the record keeping requirements. But generally, supporting information and records related to information that were reported are required to be kept, and they have to be kept for a period of no less than 5 years and made available to CARB staff within 72 hours of a written or verbal request. And that's it.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. So those were for the next few slides, we'll be moving on to the PowerPoint. Next few slides, I'll turn it over to Brandon, and he'll be covering those.
All right, thank you. So think what Chris said, right, in terms of reporting, we've posted several things. We have a whole bunch of documentation and guidance that's in progress. So it should be posted over the next couple months. So you'll want to continue to check the webpage, and of course we'll put out a Gov delivery notice, and we'll let people know when some of the really detailed guides, for those of you who maybe did truck and bus with us or some of the other rules over the years, it will literally walk you screenshot by screenshot and tell you where to click and what to put in depending on the different provisions and why you're reporting as well. I did want to mention, we mentioned that trackers is not being used for clean truck check. We had a number of questions on clean truck check, and it's not related to ACF, but I just wanted to throw a warning out. If you are somebody who's managing a fleet or you're operating in California, and when I say the heavy duty I&M or clean truck check, and that's news to you, there are requirements coming up at the end of the year. It's basically a smog check, smoke check for heavy duty vehicles. Definitely jump on our website, and we'll show you that in a few minutes, and take a look for that. It is something that's new here that impacts most of the commercial heavy duty vehicles in the state, just in general. So I wanted to mention that. Let me go ahead and jump forward here. I wanted to talk just a little bit about resources and sort of wrap things up, and we have a handful of other general common questions that we were hearing. So here on this slide, there's some common self-service resources for you to access. Right here at the top is the link to the ACF program main webpage. Honestly, I always Google CARB and ACF and it pops right up. But I've also saved the link to get there quickly. We've been updating this page with new fact sheets, and we'll be continuing to add new features to cover all of the rule requirements, the provisions, right, extensions, and then frequently asked questions as well. So keep taking a look out for that as we've been adding new things onto it. And I think Melanie mentioned the searchable FAQ. That's a really great resource, and we'll be regularly updating it as well. What else you need to know? Today's presentation, right, we're recording it. We will be posting it to the website probably in a week or two. We'll try to get that up. It's going to be at the same link that Olivia has been putting into the chat for the location of today's presentation. It's that ACF main webpage, and then on the left-hand side it says meeting and events is where we'll have that posted. So that's another good thing out there. And then what else do you need to know? Fleet calculator. They have the fleet calculator tool. I think we're going to try to show you that. What else? Oh, and then the truck regulation implementation group. So the TRIG. And so we had an initial meeting, kickoff meeting on this group. Used to be called TRAC for those who've been around a long time. It's been renamed into TRIG. And that's the group and series of subcommittees that will help coordinate with our stakeholders. We'll get feedback and just sort of a smooth rollout of this rule. And you can see on the slide here, here's 4 of the categories: the infrastructure, rule provisions, outreach, and border communities committees. And so I think we have, I believe the first week of December, we're intending to hold some more meetings. I'm not sure if the notices have gone out yet. It's still a little early, being only mid-October. So those are some resources. Let me jump to the next slide. I put in the screenshot of the ACF webpage. We do have time. Molly's going to run us through a demonstration of the pages. I think she's doing it right now, actually.
Sorry, Brandon. I'm sharing my screen now.
Did you grab my screen? Okay.
Trying to do this live while you were talking about.
There we go. All right. I only have 3 monitors going, and I could use a 4th right now. So you can see the links to the FAQ fact sheets, the reporting system, the ZEV truck stop there on the bottom right corner is, I think, a really useful one. What else do you need to know? The thing about the ZEV truck stop, maybe Molly, you can click on the ZEV truck stop real quick. The outreach sections put this together. It has a whole bunch of information about all things ZEVs, like how to go zero emissions, like infrastructure, picking vehicles. As I said up front, today's presentation is really on the rule of what do we have to do for the rule. But if you want to talk about how do the vehicles work, something like site selection, things like that, what are the funding opportunities? The ZEV truck stop is a really excellent tool to help you out. We have some really basic ZEV 101. Like we start talking about kilowatts and kilowatt hours or hydrogen in kilograms. That can help. It can help you sort that out if you're new to this area. Like I think everybody was, and everybody is still learning. Okay. What else did I want to mention? I think that's it, Molly. Hang on, I think I have like I had a couple of general questions, Molly, that I need to go through before. But Molly, do you want to go ahead and run us through anything else I haven't mentioned? Maybe show the fleet calculator and the reporting logins.
Sure. So from our homepage, if you're not already subscribed to the ZEV Fleet email listserv, that's the button to do that. You can get to Advanced Clean Trucks, the ZEV Truck Stop, and all these other links. You can subscribe from the left-hand navigation bar. There will be a recording of this event posted in the meetings and events page. So it'll be here. There'll be a video recording link here on the right-hand side in this table. Also, we talked earlier, Brandon mentioned the trig. There is a recording available as well as the presentation there. We have not sent out any of the Gov deliveries announcing those meetings in early December yet. They will be out soon, at least a month in advance. And new page here is the regulatory documents. Oops, there was this one. Regulation advisory, new, all the regs are here. And then our self-service portal is available through the FAQs link on the left-hand side. We've been going over a lot of the information that's already available to you through these fact sheets. So, and we'll be adding to this. We are adding to it almost every day, it seems like. There is a video, a short video. It goes over, without a question and answer session, but goes over the presentation that you heard today. There is the calculator that's been mentioned a few times. If you click on it, you're taken to a new page, and then you can download it. I'm not gonna be able to share it because it's in a different window, but you can open it. It's in Excel. And then there is the searchable FAQ. That is a Power BI report that is a database essentially of all of the frequently asked questions. So you can use this drop-down list and select one of these 4 categories, or you can type in, and you do have to close it with this little arrow button. So that wasn't obvious to me when I first used this. You can type in like drayage, press enter, and then all of the questions and answers that have drayage as in them will show up. There are links to provide you with more information. You will get, when you click on one of these hyperlinks that are denoted with the underlined text, you can click on it. A window will open up, and I'm not sure if you can see that, probably not. Can you see the window that's opening up that's asking me if I can confirm this navigation? Brandon?
I can see it on my side. Confirm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that it's just a safety thing, but you say always allow if you want, and then you'll be taken to the source document. I see thumbs up. Thank you. Yeah, it was fun to make. So yeah, we hope to keep adding to this so you can serve yourself. You can find information at your fingertips. And what else? I think that was all I wanted to show.
Okay.
So, Brandon, you want to
yeah,
share
that's
screen?
everything. Let me go ahead and try to pull my screen back on. You see that?
Yeah, I see it, Brandon.
Perfect. All right, thanks for that, Molly. I think that was helpful. just to have everybody sort of see where these various resources are that we've been talking about today. So let me finish up last pieces of information, I think a few more questions that are important. Give me 1 second. Okay. So here on this page, you can see there's the Advanced Clean Fleet email address. So zevfleet@arb.ca.gov. If we missed your really specific question today, or you have a really specific follow-up, please send us an email. For any information on some of our other regulations, you can go to the truck stop webpage, arb.ca.gov/truck stop. You'll see right on that page too, we have another link to the ZEV truck stop as well. But I think many of you who have been working with us and been our stakeholders for years are really familiar with the CARB truck stop page. So that's still there. And it does have a lot of great links to the different funding areas and the different rules, as well as I mentioned some of them today. We can get you over to there. We have the hotline, the 866-634-3735. I would note we've stopped using the diesel part of that hotline. I took it for about a dozen years on the expert side. But we have trained the operators. We've been training them. We've been updating folks on how to provide assistance on the ACF rule as well. And I think we may be getting some new sort of ZEV overlays on that. So I'm sure we'll have a fun phone number to share with you in the future with ZEV in it. So those are all the things I wanted to show you. So feel free to reach out to us if you do have specifics. I know I went through the questions. There were a lot of really detailed questions that just don't have time to get into. So buzz us a note. Okay, so one last thing I wanted to do is we had a few general questions. Let me talk about those real quick. The first one is there a labeling or dealer requirement, right? And then if I misspeak, Chris and Molly, hop in and correct me. There is no labeling or certification needed for this rule. So unlike some of our other provisions, we had to have a label on the side. Some of our other rules, you had to have a label on the side, like an ag label, something like that. That's not required. What is in the rule, and Chris mentioned this, is we do have a disclosure language of the regulation applicability. It is required for hired fleets in either the hiring contract or the agreement or as an addendum as well. If you need the specific language, jump into the actual rule language that applies to you if you're the government, high priority fleet, or drayage, and just you can do a quick search in the document for disclosure, and it will pop right up. You want to use that specific text. Is there for you to use. What else is required? The other question that I wanted to mention. Oh, hang on. One more thing about the sales disclosure. Sorry. When you sell the vehicle, it's subject to the regulation. Make sure you put it on the bill of sale, sales contract addendum, or the invoice to the purchaser. Sorry about that. Just one or two more. This was a pretty common one. We did not get it all into funding today. I'll just say this, there is a lot of funding available. I've been working on the HFIP small fleet program, but HFIP has funding. There's several other pots as well, but we're not getting into that today. But the question is, how will ACF work with HFIP incentive funds? What truck funding options cannot be used for compliance, right? And this is a pretty common question we have over the years. And so basically, what does that interplay with the incentives? So the answer is beginning January 1st, 2024, if a fleet owner receives California state provided incentive funding for ZEV or NZEV, and the funding program guidelines specify that any vehicles acquired with such funds cannot be used to determine compliance with the general requirements. Section is 220-2015D. Any vehicle acquired with such incentive funds will not be counted as a compliant vehicle during the funding contract period. Right, the fleet owner needs to meet the reporting requirements specified in the regulation. So what does that actually mean? It basically means that it is up to the funding program guidelines of that specific funding program that you're using, right? So if you're potentially using HFIP, the regulation looks at their guidelines, and their guidelines should specify if how much surplus, how early you need to take action. Contact the funding program staff if you have any questions on that. And then we're also working on a fact sheet to help cover this as well. So I think that's an important piece for people to understand. Right now, we're being pretty generous. I think HFIP is saying you really just need to take action before your regulatory requirement. We want to get funding. They're not saying you have to do it 6 months or a year ahead of time, though you do have to be in compliance with the rule. So I think that's important. And then one last question that we had, it's very short, and it was from stakeholders. It was, how will we as CARB track our performance and success? Which I thought that was an interesting question. One of the things that we promised in the rule is that the executive officer will provide an update to the CARB board, our board members, by 2028 on the implementation status of the regulation. So that's, if you've ever seen those we're talking about, we go through, we show here's the status, how many vehicles are in, how the reporting is going, usually what compliance rates look like, things like that. So we'll be working on that over the next few years as well. So there is a feedback mechanism to our board. Okay, I think that is everything for today. I think Emery's maybe going to pop on if anybody else wants to say a few words. I hope you found the training useful. We do have a survey that will pop up as you exit Zoom. You can let us know what you thought about today. So I just want to thank you all for being here and working with us. And I did say we did have an earthquake in Isleton during the middle of the meeting. So, but it was very small, so it wasn't a false alarm. Okay, Emery.
Yeah, I just also thank you, Brandon, and thanks to all the staff who helped in this training webinar. I do hope that the participants found it useful. We will be doing more of these. We'll figure out what they look like exactly. And but we are in the field too. So just wanted to mention that we are going to be in Chula Vista this Friday. So if you're in the area, it is on the CARB page on the events calendar, but it'll be at the North Island Credit Union Amphitheater. We will have vehicles on site so that you can test drive them if you have a commercial license. But our staff are also here to answer questions. We'll be giving the same presentation. We will have a presentation on incentives and other support. So just wanted to, again, thank you for attending. Yeah, we hope that you found this useful. I'm looking forward to providing you more support.
And let me just thank Molly and Chris and Yusuf specifically. They put a lot of time into running through these questions as well. And Olivia for being in the background posting links, and Jessica Johnston for helping us with drayage as well. All right, thanks everybody.
Wait, and Wente.
And Wente, yes, our Zoom host.
Yeah, that's a big job. So
yes,
thanks,
we made sure we got the presentation posted for everybody today too. Did I forget anybody? I think that's everybody.
You said Jessica, right?
Yeah.
All right, good.
Perfect. All right, thank you.